Here. Well, hello, everybody. This is Brian Johnson, staff writer with Finance and Commerce, and this is Beyond the Skyline podcast. As more Minnesotans move into Western Wisconsin to work and live, the St. Croix Economic Development Corporation and other experts recently completed a study to look at the current housing situation and future trends on the Wisconsin side of the river. The study reveals, among other things, that St. Croix County will need an additional 4,300 to 4,600 new housing units by 2050 to accommodate projected growth in changing household demographics. My guests today on the Beyond the Skyline podcast are Melissa Meschke, Executive Director of the St. Croix EDC, and Susan Badke, Senior Planner / Deputy Director of the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. Melissa and Susan will break down the results of the study, crunch some of the numbers, and talk about opportunities and challenges in the St. Croix County housing market. Welcome, Melissa and Susan. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
So let's jump right into it. Tell me a little bit, first of all, about the reason for this housing study and what is your biggest takeaway from this report?
Yeah, this housing study really came out of continued conversations that really focused around housing. I couldn't go a single day without bringing up housing when working with businesses. It's hard to attract people to your company. It's hard to retain people to your company when there's nowhere for them to live. Living is too expensive or they're living too far away. So we started this collaborative community effort actually last September, so about a year ago, and really worked to get community buy-in. We got funding from local community partners, including municipalities, as well as individual businesses like our healthcare organizations in the area. So we really had a lot of community support right from the beginning, which was really great. And throughout this process, we involved many stakeholders along the way. Susan completed, I think, almost 50 interviews for local stakeholders. We also worked with all the municipalities to gather the data too. So really in working with this plan, the EDC wanted it to be a collaborative effort and have a lot of community support. And I think we achieved that, which is really exciting. Throughout this process, we worked with many different people that gave us many different perspectives. We really knew that we didn't have enough housing in St. Croix County, and we knew the housing that we had and that was being created is too expensive, right? So I think some of the things that really stuck out for me throughout this process was helping people understand what affordable housing is. Everybody has kind of in their mind what affordable housing might look like. A lot of people think of LIHTC projects or low income housing. But what Susan and I really tried to focus on with this housing study was that those middle ground people that have great jobs that are supporting our communities, like teachers and police officers, we need them in the community to be successful. So we did a lot of educating around what affordable housing is, talking about that 30% threshold that people should be spending on housing to not be housing cost burdened. So that educational piece really stuck out to me. Obviously, Susan's the pro on the data, so I can let her talk on that, but I know that education piece was really a highlight for me.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. Thanks for that. And Susan, what are your thoughts on the data? What are your takeaways?
Yeah, so the data in St. Croix County, I mean, it really reflects, and what I heard throughout interviews was the data really validates what a lot of people think, right? And what they see in the housing market. St. Croix County is a growing county. Much of it is from net migration of folks moving into the county. We certainly have some births and deaths, and that plays a role in population trends. But again, as it relates to St. Croix County being a border county, many folks moving in, and many of them from Minnesota. That's shown in the data, and that was echoed in interviews. We also have a growing number of households. So those people are creating, households, but many of them are actually, we're seeing a decreased housing size overall. So growing in households, but they tend to be smaller, which means that maybe we need to look at opportunities or options for some smaller housing units. So we need more housing units to accommodate those those additional households that are coming in. Many seniors as well. are choosing to stay in their current home, right? And that's for a variety of reasons. And these trends that we're seeing in St. Croix County, very common throughout. They're not really unique to St. Croix County. It's really trends that we're seeing throughout the state and really nationwide as well. Those seniors that are staying in their homes, some just frankly want to stay there, right? You have a passion for your house that you grew up with, had a family, but many have expressed a desire to, maybe downsize, and there just isn't housing available for folks to downsize to. And, subsequently, interest rates play a role in that as well. If you've got a mortgage and you have refinanced and have a relatively low interest rate, you're not looking to move. And so that kind of disrupts that kind of natural housing life cycle, whereas a senior might, traditionally have moved, downsize, that would free up a housing unit for a workforce family that's looking to move in, or someone that's maybe renting, that's saving, looking to get and buy their first home. Housing costs are certainly increasing and have increased at rates that are much higher than our wages, right? And I think, Melissa mentioned we took a specific kind of analysis and dove deep into the workforce and what those average wages are, how they kind of line up on the spectrum of the wage scale. And that some of those folks, those teachers, I spoke as part of the interviews, I spoke with some of the superintendents in various school districts throughout the county, and they echoed really that need for, if we want to retain and more so attract, either for entry level teachers or even upper level teachers that we're trying to recruit and attract, we really need to have housing opportunities and options available for all spectrums of the ages, incomes, the full range. But we really dove deep into those wages, and I think that was one of the biggest things that I think folks were interested in and were educated on, was what are those median annual earnings for some of our top occupations in the St. Croix County. Also, just a very low vacancy rate, both on the rental market and the owner market. So not much available for sale. That really, puts stress on the market with supply and demand. The fewer homes available for rent or sale, the higher the price that can be charged. And so that has put some pressures, and there's pressure on households, making them housing cost burden. So they're spending more of their income on housing costs, less on other housing. So as you mentioned in your intro, we looked at housing demand, looking out using the state's population projections. We project, and of course projections are not guaranteed, but we estimate and project that based on those population projections prepared by the state, that St. Croix County is, in need of out to 2050, over the next 25 years, in need of about 43 to 4,600 dwelling units. And again, we don't say you need X amount at this price point, right? That's really a detailed market study. But I would stress, again, that workforce housing need, as our demographics are changing, aging population. How do we recruit, attract, and retain younger folks to stay in St. Croix County? And it's really important that we look at housing costs as a part of that.
Yeah, and when you look at the need for up to 4,600 more housing units by 2050, what do you see as some of the barriers to new development in St. Croix County?
Yeah, Melissa, did you want me to touch on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think there's a number of hurdles, and I wouldn't say necessarily to new development. I'll let Melissa speak to just new development in general. But when we're talking about developing housing that is maybe affordable for our workforce, there certainly are some barriers or challenges. And again, not necessarily unique to St. Croix County, but really, many communities and counties are struggling with it, right? So we've seen, an increase in building material costs. So I think it was from January 20 to, yep, I've got it right here, from January 20 to December 2024. So that short, 4 or 5 year period of time, single family construction costs increased about 40%. And I would guess that that increase has actually continued to go up since, the end of 2024. So that certainly plays a role. Labor. So in terms of how many folks are employed in the trades, residential construction employment in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan statistical area is still low. So in 2008 recession, many of those contractors left the trades, switched gears. We weren't building much. And so they exited that segment of the workforce population that was, in that residential construction segment. And so we just haven't filled that gap. That's a challenge. And so labor costs, again, supply and demand, when you have fewer folks working in the trades, labor costs certainly have increased. Some other local challenges that were brought up during the interviews, of course, regulations, right? We have zoning, land division fees, whether that's permit fees or impact fees, just the time that it takes. Neighborhood opposition certainly plays a role. And that's development in general, but specifically when you're talking housing that maybe is affordable for populations that are different than what a neighborhood is, right? Or that, like Melissa mentioned, kind of trying to overcome the stigma associated with the term affordable, and that really everyone needs housing that's affordable, and it's all based on your household income and what you can afford. So those are some of the challenges, I would say, to development, and specifically development of housing that's affordable for our workforce. It's not, what did I say during the housing forums? Development of affordable housing is not affordable, right? You have your developers, your builders there. This is their livelihood. This is their job. They're, unless they're mission driven for affordable housing, they're looking to make a profit. And so it is a challenge to meet this need and to build housing that's affordable for the workforce.
And I think I'll just add, from a new development standpoint, these developers are having a really hard time just getting these projects to pencil between interest rates and rising costs, like Susan had talked about. And I'm working with some developers that they have to charge market rate rent because otherwise the product doesn't work. So I think that's a challenge. And then from a single family home development standpoint, they can build these $500,000, $750,000 homes and they sell. So where is the motivation to build smaller, more affordable housing? And even when we do build smaller, what works on paper to make the price, to make any profit to build a house under $350,000 these days is very challenging. So I think we had a lot of revealing information as we went through the study to, really answer to why new development in particular is very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're hearing a lot about that here on the Minnesota side as well, with the affordability being a huge challenge. There's been talk about the need for more missing middle housing, and maybe even having the government play a role in things like having a cap on minimum lot sizes, or some regulations on maybe easing the permit fees and things like that. But I don't know if that's a conversation that's happening in Wisconsin as well, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that's definitely part of the conversation. One of our recommendations from the board, actually, after the study was completed, was to look at some of those unused smaller lots. They might not meet a lot minimum size, and maybe they're, stuck in these neighborhoods, but all the infrastructure is already there. So is there a way to develop those plots? That's one of the things that we've been exploring, just from a cost standpoint. To start with a fresh piece of ground is a lot more expensive than trying to develop within these neighborhoods. So we did talk a lot about missing middle and trying to solve those. One of the other things that has come up is regulations around modular housing. So making sure that communities allow modular housing, so not manufactured housing, but modular housing, just a house built in a factory instead of on the ground in front of you. There's a lot of opportunities to save cost. Through our work, we've discovered that modular houses are about 30% less cost than a stick build. So, are there opportunities to build some of these smaller modular homes twin homes. You can also build modular to increase the development for that missing middle.
Yeah, thanks for that, Melissa. And we alluded to the some of the challenges of on the affordability side in outstate Minnesota, for example. There's a need for more housing in general and more affordable housing in particular. One of the challenges there that the wages are lower, and so the rents they can charge aren't as high as what they might charge in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and yet construction costs are just as high. So it's really hard to make those projects pencil out. So are you seeing some of that in St. Croix County?
Yeah, I'm working with a developer that's trying to put up a multifamily unit, about 80 units. And I talked to him about having some affordable units, maybe some sort of buy down program with the village or working with local businesses to do some buy downs. And he's still short, I think, 1.5 million on paper at market rate. And for the communities looking to develop in, market rate apartments are going to be quite a bit more expensive than what most things cost in that community. So, they're looking at the black and white, right? How do we make these projects work? And lowering those rents is really challenging.
Yeah, and I would just add, I spoke with, as part of the interviews for this study process, I spoke with an affordable housing developer out of the cities that I had met at a conference, and I said, what are you working on any projects in St. Croix County? And she indicated that she was, considering a project or exploring a project in one of the communities, and a community that actually was very willing to assist, had some dollars, was, willing to reduce parking requirements, but because of the kind of higher incomes on paper, right? So not necessarily higher wages, but as we mentioned, at the beginning, we have folks that are moving over, many from the Twin Cities. Those folks are older, empty nesters, have higher dollars, and so on paper, St. Croix County looks like its household income is quite high, right? It looks like, but it again that on paper it doesn't really match the wages, especially entry level, the average, annual wages. And she said, because of the higher household income in St. Croix County, countywide, it's really difficult to find sources of funding that, for example, the low income housing tax credit, some of the other programs that are administered through our state housing authority. And so she couldn't get the numbers to work. And I even said, well, what about just a market rate? And she's like, the incomes and the costs. She's like, I can't get anything to pencil. And so it's just another reflection of a different project that, again, it's hard to make those numbers work.
Yeah, thank you for that, Susan. I was wondering also, we just talked a little bit about more Minnesotans looking to St. Croix County for their housing needs. What do you think is prompting some of that?
Good question. I think, taxes is part of that conversation that came up a lot in our interviews for this, and availability. The cost is slightly lower than right across the border in Washington County. So if they're looking for something just slightly less expensive with less taxes, that does tend to be an interest to draw people over here. The city of New Richmond had a 55 plus development going in their downtown a few years ago, and they were anticipating that it would free up a lot of housing in the city, and allow some of those older individuals, not old by any means, but older individuals, to relocate and downsize. And what ended up happening is almost 70% of the building had Minnesotans move in. So there's a lot of interest for people coming across the border to live here in St. Croix County. I think people like being close to the city for those amenities, but having more of a country style living. We do have more land, more farmland. These communities aren't near as large as what you're finding in the Twin Cities. So I think there's several factors that come into it. Obviously, I'm not going to speak for anybody that moved over here, but these are the things that came up in interviews.
And to the extent that housing development is happening in St. Croix County, can you pinpoint or maybe walk me through some of where some of the hot spots are?
Yeah, I would say definitely City of New Richmond, City of River Falls. They are both very active in housing, both multifamily and single family. Those ones really stick out in my work. And Susan can talk from a data standpoint, but I know when we did those interviews with those communities, those were two of the most vibrant and fast growing. A lot of people talk about Hudson, but Hudson's pretty full. So at this point, we're thinking about redevelopment. You're at annexation. There's a little bit more of a complication to develop in the city of Hudson, although it gets a lot of attention right across the border. But those smaller communities, just slightly a little bit further from the border, are the ones that are the fastest growing.
Yeah, I'd echo that. It was encouraging throughout our meetings, and when we presented this, we held 7 roadshow sessions this summer to kind of present some of the findings. And there was a builder, I think it was at our final session, a builder working over in Woodville who found some lots that were available. They had been platted, perhaps some infrastructure. I don't recall the exact specifics, but it was really encouraging because, of course, Woodville needs housing too, right? All of our communities. And so, yes, New Richmond, River Falls are doing a lot of great things and seeing a lot of growth. But to hear that Woodville is, seeing growth, and that builder just joined on that project, I think, about a year ago. So shortly after our study began and some interviews were done. So that's encouraging and exciting.
And Woodville, that's close to Baldwin, isn't it?
Correct.
My son is in a fall baseball league, and he just on Sunday had a doubleheader in Baldwin, and
Okay.
Oh, nice.
we got to see the area. Beautiful country out there, great facilities for baseball and other sports, but yeah, nice country out there. So
Yeah.
I can see what attracts a lot of people to that area.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so any other final thoughts or takeaways that you care to share with me? I think we covered a lot of ground there, but is there anything else that either of you would like to add?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is Susan alluded to those housing study roadshows that we did. We did 7 locations over an 8-week period to present the data and then open it up for community conversations. So we had almost 130 people attend those events between the 7 locations, which I was really pleased with and really excited to see so much interest on the community level. But it made me really excited to see where this plan will go, right? It's not one of those things you just do and print it out and stick it on a shelf. A housing study has to be used and managed and shared and presented on to make it really effective. So I already have several meetings set up over the next few weeks to do presentations on this and share with realtors and share with the housing association. So, there's a lot of opportunities to actually use the plan. And I think that's one of the things I wanted to make sure was really going to happen after this plan was done. I don't want it just to be done and be some data to hang out and do nothing with. So I'm optimistic and excited based on the community buy-in that we've had so far that this housing study will have a big effect here in St. Croix County.
All right, thanks for that, Melissa. Any final thoughts, Susan?
Yeah, I just echo, it was a pleasure working with St. Croix Economic Development Corporation on the project. And, I think they put together some really, really strong recommendations. So the study provides a whole kind of menu, I'll call it, or library of different housing strategies, right? There's not one solution or strategy to this challenge. It's complex. It's going to take time and take many partners to advance. And I think St. Croix County is well positioned to do that, especially with St. Croix EDC kind of leading that charge and pushing this forward. And so I think they've put together, and honed in on some really good recommendations. And, while there were plenty of conversations that took place during the study, I think it's really just the start. I think St. Croix EDC and other partners, there's many other partners throughout the county that are positioned and at the steering wheel to really guide it forward and move this forward and continue those conversations, and hopefully we'll see some good things happen from it.
Well, absolutely. And thank you again both for your time. Very interesting study. And thanks for doing that. And thanks for the information.
Yeah, thank
Yes,
you for
thanks
having
again.
us.
Thanks. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.
Yes, you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.